Today we're interviewing Leo Barton. Uh, the location of interview is in the library at Nick Israel Temple in Savannah, Georgia. Uh, Today's date is Tuesday, April the 19th, 2005. Mr. Barton has kindly consented for this interview, and we will take some additional biological identifying information as we begin.
Okay.
Mr. Barton lives at 5507 Woodlawn Drive. Woodland, yes. Even got it right in front of me. Woodland Drive, Savannah, Georgia, 31406. I have already that you were listed in the U.S. Army February the 25th, 1941, and served active duty through December 16th, 1945, and continued in reserve for approximately 12 years. He entered the Army as a private and was discharged as a captain. And did you enlist, or were you drafted into service?
Well, I had a very low draft number, and I didn't do anything to delay it.
Did it coming? Yes. Okay.
At the time, by the way, I was not a citizen yet.
Huh.
And also at that time, there was no automatic citizenship or accelerated citizenship if you went into the Army.
Right.
But I figured I had my first papers, which is, of course, the Declaration of Intention to become a citizen. And I figured if I expected to become a citizen and enjoy the advantages of citizenship, I had a right to share the obligations.
Yes. And you were born in Heidelberg, Germany, on March 11th, 1913.
Correct.
And you said you came to the United States in 1938.
Right.
Tell us something about the circumstances of your coming to the United States.
Well, very simply, I had studied law at the University of Heidelberg, and I was very much interested in constitutional law. In fact, in the winter of 1932, I had contacted the professor at the University of Heidelberg who taught constitutional law, a Professor Anschütz, that I eventually wanted to write a dissertation in that field, and would he accept me as a doctorand. He made an appointment. They said we can discuss that during spring vacation. Come to my home on April 1st, 1933, 10 o'clock in the morning. It was Saturday morning. When I did come at that time, he opened the door, welcomed me, and said, before we go into anything specific, I have to tell you that I just handed in my resignation. I cannot square it with my conscience to teach constitutional law under this new Nazi regime. We had a very interesting conversation discussing what field, and he advised that constitutional law under this new regime was not a good field to write a dissertation on. We discussed who I possibly might contact, and he offered to recommend me. However, I knew the professor with whom I was going to work then, and thanked him for his offer, but figured that it would be better for me to make a direct contact with him. So eventually I worked with a Professor Ulmer, Ulmer, and wrote a dissertation in the field of unfair competition, about the subject of the legal protection of geographic indications of origin according to German, French, and English law. And eventually got my doctoral degree in 1934. However, under the Nazi restrictions, I was not permitted to take the state boards, and gradually regulations were put into effect where I could not even have worked in legal work in the back room of a law office.
So the anti-Semitic policies were heavily in place already at that time.
Right, and became stricter and stricter.
Was this professor that resigned, was he Jewish?
No, you mean the one that...
that first advised you and said that he
oh,
had
the
resigned?
election? No, he was not Jewish, but he correctly stated that to write a dissertation about anything that had to do with constitutional law and political science would be more vulnerable to Nazi difficulties than anything in civil law. In fact, one of the professors with whom I might have worked had a Jewish wife, and in this original conversation we both thought that professor eventually might have difficulties on account of that.
Yes.
So that ruled out going to that one.
So you had received your doctorate, and
right.
but you were not allowed to
take the state boards.
Take the board.
Yeah.
And that was in 1934.
Correct.
4 years before you came to the States.
Yeah.
What transpired during those 4 years? It became more and more evident that you could not practice your profession.
Right. Well, at that point, I originally had no particular contacts for emigration. And, well, let me ask you, the things I did in between would not be of particular interest, would it be?
Well, in terms of your motivation to come to the States is not necessarily a part of the World War II history.
Yeah.
But, where you're,
just in brief, that's not really part of it. I had one job with a gentleman in the Frankfurt area who did a certain amount of export business with England, and I accompanied him on a business trip to England, Scotland, and so on, which took a couple of months, which did not give me any contacts that might have been useful, but still added to my knowledge of English business procedures and so on. And this particular gentleman had a physical difficulty where he had to travel with a companion. And apparently on some previous business trips he had a nurse companion, but figured that he wanted to try somebody who would be assisting in the business part rather than the health part. So This turned out to be a temporary job because after this trip to England was over, there was no real productive work for me to do. Then I had, for just about a couple of years, a clerical job in a furniture factory in the Darmstadt area, which provided some, let's say, monetary support, subsistence, but which was definitely not a career opportunity under the circumstances. And in the meantime, I had finally located a contract to get an affidavit to come to the United States. The gentleman who furnished it was actually a brother of my paternal grandmother. He had come to this country in 1881. But had never returned to Europe. And an uncle of mine located his address, and I made a contact with him, asking whether he could provide affidavits for myself and my mother. By the way, my father had passed away in 1921.
I was going to ask you.
So it was just my mother and myself. Mm-hmm. He originally wrote back that he was very glad to hear from me, but that he was in his 70s, living at the time with a daughter and son-in-law, and was not in a position to be of assistance. I answered him, thanked him for his letter, and told him I understood the situation, and I continued to look, unsuccessfully, for other contacts. Unexpectedly, a couple of years later, I got a letter from this same gentleman. His name was Leo Gross, Gross. That he had married again, had now a place of his own, and he would be willing to send papers, but that he only could send papers for one person. He thought that sending papers for more might be rejected as not economically strong enough.
Yeah.
I decided to accept it and eventually got my visa and arrived here, as I mentioned, in 1938. Then, of course, as soon as I got a job, which I was fortunate to get within less than a month, I sent papers for my mother. By that time, the waiting list in Germany for visas had increased so much that it took 2 years before my mother was given a date to report to the American consulate. But before that date came, there was a wholesale roundup, and she wound up in a concentration camp in southern France, in Gurs, G-U-R-S, in Camp Gurs, in southern France, not far from the Spanish border. Fortunately, she was released from that camp after about 1 year and made it over here in November of 1941, just about 3 weeks before Pearl Harbor. That's the way I felt at the time. I got an emergency leave of 3 days when she arrived. I advised her not to take the easy road associating with people who could speak German, but to get a dictionary and read the daily newspaper and become fluent in English. Even though it might be a little bit more difficult in the beginning. Just to mention that story.
Yes.
Since I was in the army, I could not do very much for her, but after I came back from the service, she told me that she was probably one of the few people of her age group who had immigrated and felt comfortable in an English-speaking environment. She had learned, she was fluent, she was comfortable, and she had 29 more years, which very easily might not have been.
And she was 79 when she came.
No, it was 29 when she passed away.
Passed away. And so she was
She
what
was
age?
about 50.
50, okay, yeah.
51 to be exact.
All right. Big changes.
Yeah.
Mm. And she spoke a little English
She knew some,
before she came.
but definitely not near fluent.
Yeah.
But she often told me that what I had told her was the best advice
Yeah.
that she could have gotten.
And she followed it. Yeah. Okay.
Now,
Fascinating.
back to
Thank you for that story.
so I was with the 71st Coast Artillery and aircraft. In that outfit, I made it to Buck Sergeant. Then I wound up in this special course at Harvard. Came back to Fort Ritchie for intelligence training. I was commissioned on August 26, 1944. And went overseas.
And when did that take place?
I don't remember the exact date of the shipment, but I went to a place in Scotland near Glasgow as port of arrival, and almost immediately and within a day went to a replacement camp near Birmingham, England, at Feasey Farms.
How do you spell that?
To the best of my recollection, that was P-H-E-A-S-E-Y, Feasey Farms.
Mm-hmm. That's the name of the town or village?
No, that was that camp.
Military camp.
Yeah.
Okay. And that's in England, okay, in Birmingham.
Near
Birmingham.
Birmingham, England, yeah.
Okay.
And within a few days, I got blind orders to report to the US Embassy in London for further assignment. Within an hour of my arrival there, a British truck came, canvas down, and I and a few others were brought to a British unit about an hour west of London. It turned out to be a British intelligence camp, which was referred to as Number 1 Distribution Center, or for short, Number 1 DC.
How long did you stay there?
I stayed there for approximately 4 months. And at the end of the 4 months, the British commanding officer, a colonel, told me, if you ever come to this area on duty or off duty, you must come and see us. And I mean it. And I said, sir, I think I know British people well enough that if you didn't mean it, you wouldn't say it. And he told me, you probably noticed, which actually I hadn't, that out of the dozen or 15 people that were assigned there at the same time with me, that only 4 people stayed there for the maximum length of time, 4 months. He said, while we cannot tell the American authorities what to do with their personnel, we could tactfully suggest that somebody's abilities might be better used in a different environment. And he added that some of the people who came at the same time with me originally had been retransferred within less than a week to 10 days after arrival, which was a very cute way of finding out how tactfully the British can do things. And by the way, at the time, I was assigned there in order to become familiar with certain intelligence procedures. And at that particular point in time, it seems that the British were superior to us in organizing intelligence material. So it turned out to be actually a very, very valuable assignment. After about 4 months, I was transferred to the continent, to a holding camp near Paris. And while waiting for a regular assignment, I was used a couple of times as an officer courier to transport classified material to various camps or institutions.
In occupied Paris, so that was
in France. Well, or on one trip, I went from there to Luxembourg.
So this was after the invasion, so of course.
Yeah. Yes, we were stationed active in France already.
So the invasion took place while you were in that 4 months of training, or is that?
No, the invasion actually had taken place earlier in June.
June, right.
So at that time, I wasn't even in England yet. But it did not take too long, and I don't remember exactly how many days. I was assigned to a newly formed mobile field interrogation unit. Mobile field interrogation unit number 4. Which was attached to 12th Army Group Tactical Headquarters.
Army Group Tactical Headquarters.
Yeah. In other words, there was apparently a rear headquarters or so. We were attached to 12th Army Group TAC. And went with 12th Army Group to Luxembourg, up towards the Belgian border and back and into Germany. And we dropped off in Wiesbaden, Germany. And then after VE Day, I was transferred from there to a place north of Frankfurt in Oberursel, which was the military intelligence headquarters for the European theater.
After VE Day.
Yeah. And that's where I basically spent the rest of my European assignment.
And give me that location again.
In Oberursel. Oberursel. Oberursel.
What was the name of that unit again? You were still in the 12th Army Group.
No, at that time, that military intelligence center was under SHAEF, SHAEF, Supreme Headquarters Allied Expeditionary Forces.
And it's just military intelligence headquarters?
At that point, yeah. And after VE Day, within a few weeks, SHAEF was dissolved. And we were under USFED, U.S. Forces European Theater. And instead of SHAEF, we fell under USFED.
Spell, give me those initials again.
USFET. That's U.S. Forces European Theater. I mean, the same station, same operation, but we were no longer under the combined Allied Supreme Headquarters. They were dissolved. We became independent. In fact, a few months after we became separate, an English major who had been with the intelligence installation that I had been, the British installation I had been with in England, visited us unofficially in Frankfurt, me and another officer who had been also with the British, to suggest that while we officially were no longer connected under SHAEF, that there might be areas of mutual interest. And I and this other officer were invited for a private visit to the British Army of the Rhine intelligence headquarters in northwestern Germany. And then based on our visit, we eventually arranged for a mutual visit and return visit between our commanding officers, unofficially.
Tell me about some of your assignments, the details of some of your work as you arrived in the European theater, and did you tell what you were being groomed to do, at what point?
Well, that is a little touchy, because while officially some things may be declassified, I became very security conscious. But in general terms, while I, for instance, was with the English, I remember that we were aware in 1944 already that some high-ranking Nazis were shipping valuables to South America in case they lost the war. And we interrogated, investigated along those lines, just as one example. And of course, we also interrogated people along the lines to find out information about developing what I call black lists, white lists, and gray lists of German personnel after the war was over, so that we would have capable people in responsible positions, not pseudo-Nazis.
So instead of just wiping out all personnel like this, what we did in Iraq?
Well, in other words, let's say under the German setup, the old German civil service used to be very professional, not political. And that type of civil servant you would want to keep, even though they had served under the Nazis.
To keep the infrastructure working.
Right.
And so forth. Yeah.
But you wouldn't want to have some Nazi who claimed that he wasn't one in that same job. So that's why I said black lists, white lists, and gray lists, depending on what the jobs were. And it was very interesting. One time, while I was still in England, I was to interrogate a German corporal where the screening officer had apparently listed on his background merely that in civilian life he had been a high-ranking official in Prussia in their justice ministry or department, or anyway in that field. When he was brought in to me for interrogation, I immediately gave him at ease, asked him to pull up a chair, sit down, offered him a cigarette, and started out, technically you are a prisoner of war, but I'm going to treat you like a colleague. You are not a Nazi. And he looked at me and said, yes, I'm not. But how do you know? Nobody had asked me that question. Everybody has treated me like one. And I said to him, I understand that in civilian life you were a high-ranking Justice Department official in Prussia. He said, yes, that's right. I said, if you were a Nazi, you'd be a major or colonel in a general's department and not a corporal in the infantry. He looked at me and said, that is absolutely right. And he respected me for immediately heading in on that. And he was a fountain of information. And I even said to him, I'm not going to ask you any questions which, as a good German, you would feel you couldn't answer.
Mm.
Unless you feel it's something we should know. And by the way, as a result, he gave some information that would have been security type information because he felt it was important for us to know it. I don't remember all the details of that, of course, but the general situation was something that really stuck to my mind.
Mm. It's a subtle discernment about a person's love for their country and a love for a regime.
Exactly, that's what I meant by that difference.
Yes.
That
And
was
so he
not
was able to respect his country's security, but not protect the regime.
exactly.
Yeah.
But based on that, he actually spoke about some things
Yes. Yeah.
because he felt they were important for us to know.
Yeah. So your background, your experience were invaluable as an interrogator. Most people could not even begun to connect with people in that way.
Well, I figured that's another point. When I went overseas and started in this work, I said to myself, while I hated the Nazis for what they had done and were still doing, and of course, having been disadvantaged personally in many ways, that I should not let personal feelings influence me in doing my job. My job as an intelligence officer was not necessarily overlapping 100% with my personal feelings.
Yeah.
And by, so to speak, suppressing personal feelings of revenge or dislike, but acting in a strictly functional manner, in many ways was good for me eventually, because I overcame a lot of things which bothered a lot of other people for a long, long time. I had never thought originally about that aspect, but it turned out to be good. And I also knew that while generally the prevailing attitude was there is no such thing as a good German, that there were some Germans who were good Germans and had stayed good Germans. In fact, when my mother came over here eventually, she mentioned that after I had left, that some of my former classmates from high school had occasionally visited her and asked whether they could be of any help, because they knew that there might be some difficulties.
Yeah.
And that was one of the examples that I'm talking about.
Your other duties, for as you say, you can't go, you can't ignore your commitment to maintain confidentiality about classified information. But you gave it a good example of interrogation responsibilities and how your your background, and your culture, and your languages were uniquely contributed toward successful work. Um, is that fairly typical that you would be interrogating? Of course, this was after the war that particular interrogation took place.
No, the one I mentioned about the corporal who
Yes.
had been, that was during the war yet.
Yes. I think people would be interested in the fact that intelligence was important, continuing even after the war, correct? In terms of
Well, of course, once the war as such was over, it continued for a number of reasons. First of all, to undo the bad things that had happened before, and to distinguish between people who claimed that they had to join the Nazis, but who had the golden party emblem, which was a sign that they joined before 1933. Sometimes I might have somebody who would tell me, oh, you had to join. Don't give me that. You had the golden party emblem. You couldn't run fast enough to join. I mean, they
ideologically.
Sometimes you pick on a little thing which in itself is not important, but which gives you a clue. For instance, one person I interrogated, and this was after the war was over, was the woman who became the Reich's leader of the female Hitler Youth. And she had been apparently at Heidelberg University for a while. And of course, without disclosing the reason for my background knowledge, I asked her some leading questions where she tripped herself up.
I suspect some people were very amazed about your knowledge, but you didn't give away your knowledge until...
I never, well, to begin with, in most of the interrogation work, we worked under cover names. To begin with. But I never gave any detail. And for instance, if a person I interrogated made a comment about how well I spoke German, I would say, oh, I learned it at school.
They might not believe you, but you still didn't give anything away.
Right.
Yeah. To put somebody at ease and establish a relationship at the same time not giving anything away is not easy to do.
Yeah.
After the war, you were still interrogating people. Were they considered prisoners after the war, or what was their status?
Well,
those you were interrogating.
Well, that depended. There were certain categories of persons who were rounded up. And
Do you need some water?
no, it's all right. I'm not exactly clear how that part was handled in real specifics, because that was really done under so-called military government. That was not an intelligence factor. But the idea was that if somebody had based on, let's say, in a political capacity that proved that they were out-and-out Nazis. They might fall under one of the suspicious categories that were detained in a general way. Mm-hmm. And of course, after a while, the people were released if they were cleared. And one of the things was that we wanted to make sure that whatever documents were available would not be destroyed. And by that I mean two types of documents. Ones that would incriminate them politically, but also the other thing, let's say if all of a sudden all real estate documents were destroyed and nobody could prove that they own certain property, that would create absolute disaster in civilian life. And who would be blamed? The occupying army, not the ones who did the destroying. So one idea was also, for instance, to locate documents that had been removed, let's say, from City Hall, maybe in some case in order to protect them from bombing damage. You see, I mean, things had been legally dislocated for protection. Now, where are they? Now, for civilian administration, we need them again. That would be an example.
So it was transitional information that was useful at one time for war purposes. It then became useful for civil administration purposes.
Exactly.
Let's recording. Before the E-Day, so you were in a tactical intelligence unit. So you were essentially following the front and interrogating.
Well, from the time that it was with this mobile field interrogation unit, we were, as I said, attached to 12th Army Group Tactical Headquarters. For them. And at that point, Luxembourg up to about North Sea and Belgium and back and across the Rhine to Wiesbaden. And there we dropped off. And of course, and later, after V-Day, we moved to this place north of Frankfurt. I think I do. As you may know, once VE Day came, the eligibility for being discharged from the service was largely based on points.
Yes.
Now, while I had come into the service very early, almost a year before Pearl Harbor, but I had spent time until the later part of 44 in the United States. I had not acquired as many points as I would have if I had gone overseas, say to England, a year earlier. Not necessarily involved in combat, but being overseas. So when VE Day came, my point count was not high enough that I would have been eligible for immediate return to the States and discharge. Then I was involved in these interrogations to ferret out former Nazis and this and that I mentioned. And when later in 45 my point count was close to making me eligible, I actually volunteered to stay on for the completion of the assignment on which I was working. The Army, in its wisdom, told me I couldn't do it that way, that I had to sign on for 12, 24, or 36 months, which I was not going to do. But I still volunteered to stay on for the completion of my then existing assignment, which was about the later part of 1945. Yeah. When yeah, it might have been late 45 or very early 46. At that point, I was close to finishing my assignment, and my commanding officer, a colonel, called me in one day and complimented me on what I had achieved so far, but mentioned to me that our unit had gotten a request for the assignment of some personnel for a special project, and he thought I might be interested in it. It was an assignment to go to Greece. The Greeks, of course, during the war had the Greek king had fled from Greece, and there was to be a plebiscite whether Greece would continue the monarchy and have King George return, or whether they would be transformed into a democracy right then and there. And there were going to be international observers to ensure that that particular plebiscite was done on the up and up. And I thought it sounded interesting, so I volunteered for that. And actually, later in early in 46, I flew by military plane to Rome, from Rome to Athens on our embassy plane, and from Athens to Salonika in northern Greece on a British plane. The British had some troops in Greece at the time. And I was on this assignment in Salonika. The Greeks assigned me a British truck driver with his truck and a student from Salonika University, Greek, as an interpreter. And I was given an area north of Salonika to the Bulgarian border to visit various voting places and so on, check that no boxes had ballots in them before the voting started or had others added. And I would go on an unpredictable schedule all over the area and interview people from all directions, even if they were communists. The communists at that time were considered a potential threat to the Greek government because of the Russian influence. And incidentally, this observer mission was supposed to be a joint mission between the English, French, and ourselves. The Russians were not invited to participate in that for that political reasons. So I had that area in the north, and it turned out to be, as I said, a very interesting thing. Now, I had an unexpected advantage. I did not speak Greek, but in my high school days in Germany, I had Latin and classical Greek in a gymnasium-type high school. So I knew Greek letters, and I could, for instance, read Greek road signs, or a sign that said Estiatorion, which would be an eatery, a restaurant, or a cafeneon, which would be a cafeteria, etc. And even that little bit of knowledge by being able to read Greek was an asset. And then, of course, after a while, when I used the interpreter in somewhat recurring situations, I would ask him such and such question, but then if the question was similar to something I had to interrogate somebody else on, I would catch the idea of the answer without waiting for retranslation. And this Greek student, from beginning to end, was never sure whether I didn't know more Greek than I let on. And there was something that I originally, when I got that interpreter, I asked him, "What's your name?" He said, "Just call me John." I said, "Oh, well, that's not your full name. Oh, you would break your tongue with my full name." I said, "Try me." He said, "John Stephanopoulos." And I went like this. But I had converted John into Ioannis.
Yes.
Stephanopoulos, written down in Greek. And when we were finished, he again asked me and said, "Don't you know more Greek than you let on?" And I told him no. And I told him what I just told you, that how I knew Greek letters and things like that. And of course, I said, if you hadn't been so suspicious, I would have told you that a long time ago.
You did keep him honest that way by not knowing more. He didn't take you down a wrong path.
Yeah, I mean, that's not one of the world events,
Yeah.
but I think you might enjoy it.
Yeah. So you were doing poll watching in those, even in that time. Yeah.
And actually, it was a funny thing. To my mind, that plebiscite was actually weighed the wrong way, because there were three ballots. One was a blank ballot. One said Georgios Vasilev, King George, and the third one said Demokratia. Now the blank and the Demokratia ballots both were counted as being against King George. In other words, democracy, or maybe not democracy, but not King George to return. So King George only had one chance out of three. But still he won at that time. But that to me, I mean, that
The mathematics of that.
mathematics seemed to be unusual.
Were you awarded any medals or any particular awards during your service?
Just a couple of commendation medals. The commendation, I had the pre-Pearl Harbor, the good conduct a couple of times. The U.S. theater, European theater, the Victory Medal, the Army of Occupation Medal. So it was 7 or 8.
As an intelligence officer, you were not in the shooting part as much, but were you exposed to raids or bombings or things that might have occurred that were...
Actually, I would say, frankly, the closest call I had one day in London. I was stationed with this British unit about an hour west of London, which was relatively safe because it was out in the country and the units were in estate buildings which did not look military. And the entire thing was laid out so that it was not supposed to look military. In fact, the headquarters building, which was not in Cheltenham, but in Beaconsfield, in a different county even, was made to look like a hospital building. So, but one day I had a pad. Now it's right, yeah. I was in London on my day off, and there was a bombing where a bomb fell into the back of Selfridge department store. And I was actually, during that time, walking on the street in front of Selfridge's, and the repercussion from the bomb, it went into sort of zigzag way, and I was on the side of the street where it did not hit. In other words, I could have easily been, if I had been across the street at the same point, it probably would not have been a fatal impact, but it still might have been splinters or some percussion damage.
Was this one of those buzz bombs or a V-2 rocket or just an aerial bomb?
I don't know.
No.
That was the time when they had quite a few of the buzz bombs as well as the V2s. The V1s were the ones you could hear, and as long as you could hear them, you were safe. And if they cut out right overhead, you were also safe because they would go on for a while. But the V2s were the ones you didn't know. And there was an idea that that one itself was a V2. So in a sense, you are never completely sure.
No.
And of course, I mean, let's say even like these couple of trips when I functioned in France as an officer courier. One time I had to go to a place near Vittel, near the Alsace-Lorraine area, which was fairly close to the front at that point. But as far as I was concerned, nothing happened.
Yeah.
So you never know.
The people that you were interrogating, were they sometimes uh, right from the front?
Yeah. In fact, this installation in England, we got prisoners as a rule within less than 24 hours after capture. They were people were what you might call a frontline interrogator, might have an idea that they had knowledge of things that could be of importance, and they were evacuated through special channels.
Obviously flown, or to get there that quick, yeah.
Yeah. And for instance, I mean, like, talk about rank name and serial number, you might ask somebody seemingly conversational, social things about, let's say, their commanding officer, who might be a colonel so-and-so or a general so-and-so, and get something about his personal behavior, like if he was a skirt chaser, because at that point, that knowledge might go to what we had, the so-called Soldatencenter West, the radio station that broadcast propaganda to the German army, and where you might have something like, you poor so-and-sos, you are in the ditches and the trenches and the mud and the shooting and so on, while so-and-so lives the high life with wine and women and Lord knows what, etc. In other words, create
morale,
a morale factor.
And you could include enough details and facts that give it credibility.
Exactly. If you have very specific names, it makes it much more believable.
Yeah, the guy that drove his Jeep would say, yeah, he knows about this.
Right.
And tells his other friend.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So sometimes, I mean, you just mentioned something which I should have remembered mentioning. You might have somebody like who was the driver for a high-ranking officer who by himself did not have any very important knowledge. But you might hear something about presumably non-military things about his boss, which for propaganda reasons might at that point in time valuable. Exactly.
So you were gathering information about the morale and the mood of the service people, soldiers. And,
right. Or for instance, I mean, the fact I mentioned about some high-ranking Nazis shipping valuables to South America. And knowledge of that type is a very important propaganda item. While you are supposed to lay down your life for so-and-so, he already, etc. I mean, your cause is lost, and this is proof of it, or he wouldn't ship things out of the country.
And his high-ranking officers would not look kindly upon some of that either, probably.
Well, sure. I mean,
but were you? Did you experience, in terms of your own heritage and being a Jew, were you ever treated in a less than respectful and egalitarian way as a serviceman, or in your background as being German? Were you ever treated in a less than courteous, respectful way as a military person?
Generally speaking, no. While I was still at 4th Story in Battery F of 71st Coast Artillery, my own platoon sergeant couldn't be better. But this was in 41. I got a 3-day pass to go back to Philadelphia for the high holidays. And I came back, and I was put on KP. Why? The platoon sergeant, not of our platoon, but of the neighboring platoon, had gotten the first sergeant to run an inspection. And my things had not been made up for inspection. Like what's to be laid out on the bed, or the footlocker was to be arranged and so on. So I was put on KP. And of course, I was on a 3-day pass for holidays. In fact, I went to our office, battery office, and find out how come and so on. Well, so and so. And the battery clerk, whether deliberately or by accident, mentioned which platoon sergeant had gotten the battery commander to run this inspection. So he was probably an anti-Semite, but it didn't affect me in general because he was not my direct superior.
Yeah.
And then later, when I became a non-com, I could work with him like I did with anybody else. So it was nothing really serious.
Yeah.
In fact, one other Jewish boy in my platoon, he said to me he was going to really protest. I mean, right home, it was a congressman, so I said, look, that is just what this guy would want. Make a big issue of it, and you may win the battle and lose the war.
Mm-hmm.
Because everybody else besides him will not give you credit for doing something that you should do. You will cause a lot of trouble to people who are not involved. And it will backfire. So he didn't do anything, and I never had. In fact, after I was out of the outfit and had been to Harvard and back at Fort Ritchie, while I was at Fort Ritchie, I visited in Washington at one time and saw my old outfit, who were still at that point stationed there, and I saw my former platoon sergeant. And when he saw me in an officer's uniform, he couldn't have been prouder if I had been his son.
So you had a little bit of one kind of experience, and then the other that was affirming and a positive experience.
And that was really the only incident that I could honestly say, and it wasn't really anything big. But
you would like to have gone to see your mother during that pass, maybe.
Yeah, but I mean, that was besides the point.
Yeah.
I mean, he knew that a couple of Jewish boys from our battery and maybe a few others were away at that time. And
let me ask you, so you were, having been in Germany and your mother had been in a concentration camp, you were already not surprised at the atrocities that were coming about. And so during the during the period of occupation, did you have the opportunity to visit any of these camps or become personally aware through observation or direct contact about some of those events?
No. Frankly, that was one thing that I deliberately did not do. I had heard about, read about, and indirectly seen about it so much, I had absolutely no desire to go to Dachau or Sachsenhausen or Ravensbrück or one of the others, Bergen-Belsen. That I didn't.
You were talking about the importance and the necessity of maintaining your own professional, I'm not sure detachment is, but it was important to keep your focus on the job professionally.
Yeah.
That might have been overpowering to do that, and made it difficult. You think
Well,
maybe that's part of it.
Let me put it this way. If it had happened that the unit I was with had to go there,
Yeah.
that would have been a different thing.
Yeah.
It would have been probably just as bad, but it was a duty assignment, and that would have made it possible. But it was not something I would volunteer for.
Yeah.
I mean, on my own time, for my own enjoyment isn't the right word,
No,
but
interest maybe.
interest.
Pursuit,
Yeah.
Maybe some of that came up as part of your intelligence work of what people were doing, but maybe that wasn't as much a part of the war effort in terms of defeating the imminent enemy.
Right.
Just finding out what tactical things were going on and so forth, getting that kind of information.
Well, what we knew about that you might sometimes use in interrogation as a way of putting down somebody. You know, you think you are doing the right thing by so and so, and actually you are doing the work for butchers like such and such.
You were you able to get back to the States? You made one trip back to the States, is that correct? After you were in Europe?
No.
No, okay. You stayed there.
When
for
I
the
came
duration.
back, I came back for good.
Were your assignments in anywhere located near where your home had been, or where parts of Germany that you had visited before?
Well, actually, where I was stationed there in the Frankfurt area, that was only about 60 or so miles from Heidelberg. That's one. But I only visited Heidelberg on a couple of occasions. I didn't spend a lot of time there. And there were a few people that I visited, but not a lot. In fact, I went to one bookstore because I just happened to pass it, and a fellow from that family had been a classmate of mine at my gymnasium at the high school, and his two sisters were in the bookstore, and they recognized me immediately, and I asked, how is Roland? And the one sister said, you don't want to meet him. In other words, the brother had turned to be a real bad Nazi. And she was very frank about it. So
that must have been a surprise to them to see you in an American officer's uniform.
Yeah, somewhat. I mean, the sisters both were very nice, and I mean, it was genuine.
Yeah.
And apparently they were very much disappointed that the brother turned out the way he did.
Yeah.
And I was surprised too, because he had never shown any indication of anything like that while we were at school. Of course, that was by that time, I graduated from high school in 1931, so by that time was more than 10 years later. In fact, 1945, 14 years
Yeah.
later. So a lot of things can happen.
A lot of things are still fresh in your memory too. I wonder what it's like being, like I say, a native of Germany and seeing all the destruction in your homeland. What was that like to see that?
Well, I was very happy to see that Heidelberg had absolutely not been bombed at all.
Mm.
That was one of the few towns that hadn't. The only damage that was done there was to one of the bridges, and that was destroyed by the Germans in retreat.
Mm-hmm.
On the other hand, Mannheim, which was only 12 miles away, had very bad damage.
Mm.
Now, as far as I could see, none of the things that were destroyed were of a nature where I would have felt sad about it having been destroyed. I mean, like things that you can rebuild and be done. But there were no doubt some areas where that was the case. I never went to Dresden, for instance, which was completely bombed out, and which I had never seen in peacetime, but which I understand was a beautiful architectural stuff. But that was, of course, revenge for Coventry.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
The same. But, so and for instance, in Frankfurt, there were a couple of buildings that had historic value that were damaged, but I assume almost that it was more accidental damage, because in a couple of cases that I remember seeing, the front of the building, the architectural appearance of the building had not been damaged. So it might have been a casual bomb or a secondary effect from something that fell in a different area. But Mannheim was pretty badly bombed, and so was Darmstadt. Frankfurt, there were large areas that were clean. For instance, Frankfurt had a huge central administration building of the IG Farben, which was sort of the counterpart of, say, DuPont in our country, or Imperial Chemical in England. And that was completely untouched. And there was a rumor that had been deliberately saved because we, the Allied, had planned to use that as a military headquarters after occupation, which is what happened.
You know, if that was a plan or whether, since it was there, it was used.
Right.
Yeah. Any particular memories about contacts with German civilians, conversation? You mentioned that a little bit about that many were receptive to the occupation and in comparison to the prospects of being occupied by the Russians.
Yeah, that was one of the surprisingly general impressions that I got. Of course, by that time, they probably knew on their own that the war was lost. It was just a question of who was going to come in. And the Americans were probably the most preferred ones, followed by the British. I have an idea that maybe in some areas the British were even better than the Americans.
Share with us a little bit about your return home, what that was like, the reception, and a little bit about your life since then, family, and so forth. Did you have brothers and sisters?
I was an only spoiled child.
So your mother was the only direct, immediate family
Yeah.
to receive you when you got back. And, you told us a little bit about that she had fared very well because she had learned the language and intermingled in society. And so you had completed your legal training, education in Germany, weren't allowed to be licensed. Did you pursue that in the States upon your return?
No, no. And I tell you why not. To begin with, in 1938, when I first came over here, some people said, why don't you try to go to a college or this or that, or law school? And at that point, I said no. At that point, it was most important for me to get economic ground under my feet and have a paying job so I could provide an affidavit to bring my mother over. And of course, by that time I got some secondary supporting affidavits from non-relatives to back it up. And eventually, well, those went to Stuttgart. But then when my mother was deported and got into a different area, the consulate in Marseille was supposed to be the one to handle that. And they would not transfer the documents from the U.S. consulate in Stuttgart to the one in Marseille. I had to resubmit new affidavits. And of course, by that time I was in the army, so economically I was really in a worse situation. But I got some secondary units, and then of course there I would assume the fact I was in the army was not a drawback. So that worked out. That I couldn't understand why between two American consulates records could not be just transferred from one to the other.
For the purpose of getting your mother out.
Yeah. And this was a case where time could have been very much of the essence.
Yeah.
And she was very fortunate because I saw one time here, many years after, some document that had been displayed about people who had been in concentration camps and where they were sent